Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I want to declare that we have a quorum. And I'd like to, I'm John Clausen. I'm the chairman of the Committee of Adjustments today. And that we have Bernie Law is one of the members. Bernie, would you please raise your hand? And Sandra Marsh is another member. Would you please raise your hand? Okay. This is an electronic hearing of the Committee of Adjustments for the town of Pelham. Everyone present and viewing at home will be given an opportunity to comment on the applications being heard. Now, I want all comments and questions addressed through the chair, please. This meeting, public meeting, has been called to satisfy the requirements of the Planning Act and council bylaws. Notice of this meeting has been given by prepaid first-class mail to all persons listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 60 meters, 200 feet of the subject properties. In addition, a public notice sign has been posted on all the lands, and information has been provided on the town's Committee of Adjustments webpage. Agencies commenting on applications may request that certain conditions be imposed should the application be approved of. That's very important there. And if you have any objections to any of the conditions, please voice them, and it will not adversely affect our decision, the committee's decision. And the process of the application and relative correspondence will be heard. Holly will read that out, following which the applicant will be given the opportunity to address the application and make a presentation. Any person concerned with the application will then be given an opportunity to participate in the meeting. And if you pre-registered to speak during the public portion of the application, you will be brought into the Zoom meeting and will be unmuted. I'd ask that you please state your name and mailing address for the record, and that please, once you finish speaking, you will be removed from the Zoom meeting room. If you are live streaming at home and wish to submit a comment during application, you may do so by emailing clerks@pelham.ca. I'll repeat, clerks@pelham.ca. At the conclusion of the public portion of the meeting, these comments will be read into the records. If you submit comments after the public portion has been closed, your comments will not be considered. At the conclusion of the discussion, the committee will render a decision and advise of any applicable conditions. Specific wording for conditions will be determined by the committee following the public portion of this hearing. Copies of the decision will be mailed to the applicant or agent and to any other person that files a written request. If you wish to be provided a copy of the decision, please contact the Secretary Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. The Secretary Treasurer's contact information is available on the upcoming PowerPoint presentation and available on the town's website. Any person, corporation, or public body has a right to appeal either the decision itself or conditions of consent to the local appeal body within 20 days of the decision, and within 20 days of the mailing of the decision for consent. Okay, additional information. The meeting is being conducted by, as you can see, the Zoom webinar, and is also being live streamed on the town's YouTube channel. You may wish to put your view on gallery view by clicking the top right corner from speaker view. We ask that you're mindful of the background noise for the duration of the meeting, so that could interfere with ours. Committee members are asked to mute their microphones until you're asked to speak. Please raise your hand if you would like to speak and vote by raising your hand. Please note that attendees who have registered will remain in the waiting room via telephone or electronically until the application of interest is brought to the committee. Those participating online via Zoom will be asked by the chair to raise their virtual hand when they wish to speak. So if I see your hand, then I'll let you speak. On the computer, you can do so by clicking on participants in the bottom center of the screen and then clicking by raise hand. On a mobile device, you can tap raise hand in the bottom left corner. So, Holly, if I miss something, just please let me know. You will then be called upon to speak, and your microphone will be unmuted by staff. And if you're participating by phone, you'll also be unmuted by staff when the agenda item that you've registered for is being issued. Applicants, agents, and attendees are advised that they are free to leave the webinar once a decision has been made on their application. So I've introduced the panel, and I also asked the panel, all three of it, Bernie, do you have any pecuniary interest in today's?
No, sir, I do not.
Sandra, do you have any?
I have none.
And I, the chair, I have none. Holly, have there been any requests for withdrawal or adjournment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there is not.
Okay, then I guess we start with the application, and we'll start with the the A?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would be beginning with B7, following into reading B8, being heard concurrently. Committee of Adjustment hearing, Tuesday, October 6, 2020. All Town of Pelham in-person Committee of Adjustment hearings have been canceled. Instead, the town is holding all Committee of Adjustment hearings electronically via Zoom. Please note, no decisions have been made prior to this public meeting. This presentation is based upon the Town of Pelham's Planning Department report and analysis. All comments received from commenting agencies and the public have been forwarded in full to the Committee of Adjustment members for their consideration. Participants are reminded, ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you will be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you will be removed from the meeting. Participant microphones and video cameras will remain off until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by the committee, your microphone will be muted. Once voting on an item has taken place, participants will be removed from the meeting completely. You will resume viewing the meeting via live stream. Decorum. The Committee of Adjustment is a formal public hearing requiring decorum, meaning all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you will be given an opportunity to address the committee at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note, comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting, otherwise they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will not be tolerated. Cheering, booing, or hissing from the gallery will not be tolerated. Please note, if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. 1150 Line Avenue applications. Please note the Committee of Adjustment's role in these Planning Act applications is to determine if the subject lands should be granted a severance or not, and if the potential new lot and remnant should be granted associated minor variances. All other Planning Act applications, such as zoning, bylaw amendments, plan of subdivision, condominium, etc., would trigger another planning meeting. The Committee of Adjustment is not the approval authority for determining if the lands will be used for townhouses, etc. Council is the approval authority for all other Planning Act applications for the Town of Pelham. Application for consent file B7/2020P, 1150 Line Avenue, Part 1. The subject parcel, shown as Part 1 on the attached sketch, is located on the west side of Line Avenue, lying north of Bacon Lane in the Town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 533.81 meters square of land, Part 1, for a single detached residential lot. 4,067 meters square of land, Part 3, is proposed to be retained for future private lane townhouse development. The use of the townhouse is not currently permitted and would need to contemplate via a zoning bylaw amendment requiring a statutory public meeting and council approval. Note, this application is being considered concurrently with consent file B8 2020P, and minor variance files A25 2020P and A26 2020P. Hydro 1, no concerns. Bell Canada, no concerns. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, see conditions. Summarized public comments and planning staff responses. Lack of information and details about future proposed use of townhouse on Part 3. Example, number of units, size, and height. Response. The developer has not applied for a zoning bylaw amendment, site plan approval, draft plan of condominium, or subdivision approval to permit townhouses. This severance application, along with the concurrent minor variance applications, are not the medium to contemplate the suggested future use of the remnant lands, which are outside the scope of the Committee of Adjustment. Where will the private road be located on Part 3? Response. See comments number 1. There is no formal development plan provided for Part 3. This should be a plan of subdivision application when building 10 plus townhouses and 2 detached houses. Response. There are not 10 townhouses being proposed. At this time, there is only 2 concurrent severance applications being heard. No formal application for townhouses has been received to date, and if they were received, we will be dealing with them separately. See comments number 1. Policy D5.1 of the Pelham Official Plan states that plans of subdivision shall generally be deemed necessary if establishing a new public road or the development is not considered to be infill or a subdivision plan is required to ensure that the entire land holding is developed in an orderly and efficient manner or 3 or more lots are being created. The proposed application is premature without full details on Part 3. Response. The redevelopment of Part 3, remnant lands, is a separate process under the Planning Act which will be dealt with via Council. In terms of Part 3, the Committee of Adjustment's focus is limited more towards ensuring there is appropriate street frontage and area of land available to support some form of efficient future development. It is the planning staff's opinion that the retained parcel, Part 3, is adequately sized and configured given its context to support future development in some capacity. However, there is no position taken with respect to the type or number of units that may be developed in the future. Proposed development is incompatible with surrounding neighborhood. Response. The proposed single detached residential land use is compatible because the land use is literally identical to the surrounding neighborhood. Furthermore, the reduced lot size is marginal and will continue to provide rear yard amenity space, landscaped open space for stormwater management, ample off-street parking, and enhance the public realm through appropriate built form at the landscape, subject to conditions. Neighboring property values will decrease. Response. There is no evidence to support this claim. Typically, when landowners reinvest in their property, such as through residential redevelopment, adjacent properties tend to experience an increased valuation based on market comparables and economic forces. Proposed frontages are not consistent with the neighborhood. Response. A lot frontage is appropriate for the proposed development that would support a single residential and would not create any adverse neighborhood impacts on its own merits. Why was no environmental impact study, EIS, conducted before removing trees on the subject lands? Response. The trees on the subject lands are not designated significant woodland, therefore an EIS is not required. Were permits granted to remove the trees on the subject lands? Response. In the absence of a municipal tree cutting bylaw, permits are not required to remove trees on private property. Concerned about flooding, particularly on Stefflar Street, where will stormwater go? Response. A grading and drainage plan is required as a condition of severance approval. Therefore, at building permit, there is also a detailed grading plan required for approval. Any future development on Part 3 will also require a detailed lot grading and drainage plan. Concerns about the impacts to groundwater. The town official plan requires a hydrological assessment and an EIS to be conducted to determine if the proposed development will negatively impact natural heritage features or ecological functions. Response. Most of Fawn Hill is designated as a highly vulnerable aquifer according to Schedule B1 of the official plan. Policy C5.2 of the official plan states that in an effort to protect, improve, or restore the quality and quantity of rural residents' drinking water, major applications for site alteration or redevelopment outside of Fawn Hill and Fenwick may need to be supported by a hydrogeological or hydrological report. Policy C5.3, vulnerable groundwater areas, states that vulnerable groundwater areas in the town which are susceptible to risk of contamination or adverse impacts due to hydrological and hydroecological dynamics have been identified by the NPCA and are shown on Schedule B1 to this official plan. Where development and or site alterations require a planning approval, the town, in consultation with the region and the NPCA, may require the undertaking of a technical study to assess the risks of negative impacts on the aquifer. The scope of such a study will be determined through pre-consultation with the town, the region, and NPCA, and recommendations from such a study that are related to design or land use will be implemented through the zoning or site plan control. The official plan actually prohibits a variety of land uses which could harm the vulnerable aquifer, including storage of hazardous materials, organic soil conditioning sites, snow storage and disposal facilities, and storage of other contaminants, among other things. The NPCA and region did not have any concerns with respect to the highly vulnerable aquifer, nor did they require an EIS to be prepared. The region and town engineering staff did outline a number of requirements for storm water management. Therefore, pursuant to subsection 53.2, an EIS or hydrological assessment was not deemed to be required prescribed information. If both of the proposed lots are approved, Part 3 will be landlocked. Response. Part 3 will have 9.75 meters of frontage, which is not considered to be landlocked. This development will set a precedent. Response. Every Planning Act development application is considered independently on its own merits. If the committee approves these two lots, will that infer any forthcoming townhouse proposal for approval? Response. No, the approval of two single detached residential lots does not mean the third retained lot will receive approval for townhouse development. Any redevelopment of Part 3 will be considered separately, and a staff recommendation will be made to council where a decision will be made exclusive of this process. Why are the heights for the future houses not shown? Response. Any permitted dwelling simply needs to comply with the default building height requirements of the zoning bylaw. The applicant is not seeking an increased building height. The zoning bylaw has a 10.5 meter height limit, which applies broadly across all residential zones throughout the town of Pelham. Why would the town even consider these applications and not just reject them upon receipt? Response. Pursuant to Section 45 of the Planning Act, the town is statutorily obligated to process all applications it receives and hold a hearing within 30 days of receiving completed application. Planning staff is of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals dealing with appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of the existing urban land supply where suitable to do so. The severance will not compromise the remnant land's ability to adequately accommodate future housing opportunities, should that be proposed, because it is of a sufficient size, geometry, and appropriate configuration. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. The remnant lands will continue as a single detached residential lot until such time as the landowner explores alternative development options. Again, it is noted that any future development on Part 3 besides one single detached dwelling will be subject to future Planning Act approvals, namely a zoning bylaw amendment and a site plan approval, both of which require council approval, and the zoning bylaw amendment will require a further public further public circulation in accordance with the Planning Act. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with provincial policy statements and conforms to the provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that application file B7/2020P be subject to the following conditions. That the applicant obtain zoning approval on Part 1, minimum lot frontage and minimum lot area. Conduct a Stage 1 to 2 archaeological assessment prepared by a licensed archaeologist and receive clearance from the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture. At a minimum, the assessment must cover the building envelope of the proposed lot eligible for disturbance and be accepted by the Ministry prior to clearance of this condition. The licensed archaeologist may recommend further archaeological analysis or preservation steps be taken. No demolition, grading, or other soil disturbances shall take place on the subject land prior to the issuance of a ministry letter confirming that all archaeological resource concerns have been mitigated and met licensing and resourcing conservation requirements. Provide front dwelling elevation plans that positively contribute to the public street through the use of a front porch, windows symmetrically proportioned to the building's mass, and a congruent use of exterior cladding, etc., to the satisfaction of the Director of the Community Planning and Development. Said elevation plans shall be substantially unaltered from those at the time of building permit. In consultation with the town's bylaw officer, install a 1.8 meter solid tall wood board fence along the north side lot line, but not extending into the front yard of Part 1, in compliance with the town's current fence bylaw to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. In consultation with the town's arborist, plant 3 large caliber deciduous street trees spaced equally along the frontages of parts 1 to 3 within the boulevard and selected from the town's approved street tree planting schedule to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Ensure all lots are serviced with, at a minimum, an individual 20 millimeter water service and 125 millimeter sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with the town standards. Installation of any services will require a temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Public Works Department. If existing services are proposed for reconnection, such services shall be inspected by the Public Works Department to determine their condition is satisfactory prior to connection. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with the works. Submit a drawing indicating the location of the individual water services and sanitary laterals for all lots, confirming no existing or proposed service branches from or through any parcel, proposed lot lines to other lands, and from or through the remnant lands to other lands. Locate cards are required after the installation of new services. Obtain approval for a driveway entrance and culvert permit as applicable, issued through the Public Works Department to town standards. The driveway entrance shall be located on the north side of the proposed lot. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan for all parcels demonstrating that drainage neither relies nor negatively impacts neighboring properties and that all drainage will be contained within the respective lots to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or designate. Submit a tree savings plan for Part 1, illustrating the anticipated building envelopes with a concerted effort to preserve as many trees as practical along the north lot line to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Existing trees that would be situated in the front and rear lot of the future dwellings are expected to be preserved in good, healthy state. This plan may be integrated with lot grading drainage plan. Sign the Town of Pelham Standard Memorandum of Understanding explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of parkland purposes are required prior to the issuing of building permit. Provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject lands of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of a certificate of consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of the consent shall be borne by the applicant. If you wish to receive a copy of the Notice of Decision, please contact the Secretary Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. Nancy Bizzato, Secretary Treasurer, Committee of Adjustment, 20 Pelham Town Square, P.O. Box 400, Font Hill, Ontario, LOS 1E0, and J. Bizzato at pelham.ca. This contact information can also be found at the Town of Pelham's website. Through you, Mr. Chair, if you would just give us a moment to share our screen with the next B8 PowerPoint, we would appreciate that, and I'm just going to take a sip of water if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am now hydrated.
Oh, good.
Application for consent file B8/2020P 1150 Lane Avenue, Part 2. The subject parcel shown as Part 2 on the attached sketch is located on the west side of Line Avenue, lying north of Bacon Lane in the town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 533.81 meters square of land, Part 2, for a single detached residential lot. 4,067 meters square of land, Part 3, is proposed to be retained for future private lane townhouse development. The use of the townhouse is not currently permitted and would need to be contemplated via zoning bylaw amendment requiring a statutory public meeting and council approval. Note, this application is being considered concurrently with consent file B7-2020P and minor variance files A25-2020P and A26-2020P. To date, the following comments have been received. Hydro 1, no concerns. Bell Canada, no concerns. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, see conditions. All public comments, as shown on the slideshow for B7/2020, have been considered for this application. You just heard me read those into the record just moments ago. Planning staff is of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals dealing with appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of existing urban land supply where suitable to do so. The severance will not compromise the remnant land's ability to accommodate future housing opportunities that should be proposed, because it is of a sufficient size, geometry, and appropriate configuration. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. The remnant lands will continue as a single detached residential lot until such time as the landowner explores alternative development options. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with provincial policy statement and conforms to provincial, regional, and local plans. Given this analysis, planning staff recommend that consent file B8/2020P be approved subject to the following conditions. Obtain zoning approval on Part 2 for minimum lot frontage and minimum lot area. Obtain zoning approval on Part 3 for minimum lot frontage. Conduct a Stage 1 to 2 archaeological assessment prepared by a licensed archaeologist and receive clearance from the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture. At a minimum, the assessment must cover the building's envelope of the proposed lot eligible for disturbance and be accepted by the Ministry prior to clearance of this condition. The licensed archaeologist may recommend further archaeological analysis or preservation steps taken. No demolition, grading, or other soil disturbances shall take place on the subject land prior to the issuance of ministry letter confirming that all archaeological resource concerns have been mitigated and met licensing and resourcing conservation requirements. Provide front dwelling elevation plans that positively contribute to the public street through the use of a front porch, windows symmetrically proportioned to the builder's mass, and a congruent use of exterior cladding, etc., to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Said elevation plans shall be substantially unaltered from those at the time of building permit. In consultation with the town's arborist, plant 3 large caliper trees equally spaced along the frontages of parts 1 to 3 within the boulevard and selected from the town's approved street tree planting schedule to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Ensure all lots are serviced with at least a minimum 20 millimeter water service and 125 millimeter sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with the town standards. Installation of any service will require temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Public Works Department. If existing services are proposed for reconnection, such services shall be inspected by the Public Works Department to determine their condition is satisfactory prior to connection. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a drawing indicating the location of the individual water services and sanitary laterals for all lots, confirming no existing or proposed service branches from or through any proposed lot lines to other lands, and from or through the remnant parcel to other lands. Locate cards are required after the installation of new services. Obtain approval for a driveway entrance and culvert permit as applicable, issued through the Public Works Department to town standards. The driveway entrance shall be located on the north side of the proposed lot. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan for all parcels demonstrating that the drainage neither relies nor negatively impacts neighboring properties and that the drainage will be contained within the respective lots to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or designate. Sign the Town of Pelham's Memorandum of Understanding, explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of development for parkland purposes are required prior to the issuancing of building permit. Provide the Secretary-Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for the use in the issuance of certificate of consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, to be submitted to the Secretary-Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions shall be borne by the applicant. If you wish to receive a copy of the Notice of Decision, please contact the Secretary-Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. Nancy Bizzato, Secretary-Treasurer, Committee of Adjustment, 20 Pelham Town Square, P.O. Box 400, Fonthill, Ontario, LOS 180, NJ Bizzato at pelham.ca. This contact information can also be found at the Town of Pelham's website. Through you, Mr. Chair, just give us one moment to stop sharing our screen and get ourselves situated. I do believe that we do have the applicant's agent and applicant's lawyer within the meeting now, so you may go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Holly. I will ask the applicant's agents if they have anything they'd like to say or any kind of, what do you call it? Let us see what you have in mind of that. Who would like to speak first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off. Good afternoon, committee, and thank you for allowing myself to speak. I'm a partner. My name is Patrick Maloney. I'm a partner with the law firm of Sullivan Manny. I do have Mr. Matt Kernahan, who is a registered professional land use planner with Upper Canada Consultants. Matt has been retained to provide objective land use planning evidence before this committee and give consultation advice to our client. I'm going to make my comments as it relates to both the consent and minor variance, just because otherwise I'll repeat myself a couple different times, and that won't be any good to you. So I will hand it over to Matt in a few moments, but I wanted to start out our presentation by stressing what applications are before this committee and what you need to determine compared to what is not before this committee. And I think Ms. Wilford properly set it out at the beginning of this meeting, that these applications are for the creation of 2 lots along Line Avenue for 2 single detached dwellings and minor variances associated with those 2 dwellings and those 2 lots. This is not about the development of part 3 on the sketch in any way. That is the larger remnant parcel, which is subject to a future development. But that application for future development is not before this committee. It is clear from most of the comments that the committee has received from the neighbors that they are in opposition, predominantly in opposition against the development of part 3. And not as there are comments with respect to the applications, but I think they're clouded by the comments as it relates to the development of part 3. In some way, the committee is advantaged by this in that they're insulated against that decision. That will come another day, and it will be before Town Council and not this committee. So at this point, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I will hand it over to Matt Kernahan, who can provide some of the planning policies and planning justification for these 4 applications.
Okay, Mr. Kernahan, I guess I ask that you proceed then with your presentation.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee, staff, and neighbors. Thank you very much, Patrick. As you mentioned, my name is Matt Kernahan. I'm with the firm Upper Canada Consultants. Our address is 30 Hanover Drive in St. Catharines, and we're located in Unit 3. I'm the agent representing Homes by Antonio, who's the owner of this property and the applicant in this instance. I've prepared a brief presentation which, like Patrick's, pertains to both the minor variance and the severance applications. So provided there are no issues technically, I'm going to proceed with that presentation if I can.
Please proceed.
So this slide just provides some context on the location of subject lands. As has been mentioned, they're on the west side of Line Avenue between Steffler Street and Bacon Lane. They're a very large property and they currently contain a single detached dwelling. Subject property is near the boundary of Fonthill and East Fonthill. It's within an established neighborhood, and single detached dwellings are located on all sides of it. Staff has done a really good job of explaining what the applications pertain to, so I'm not gonna go into any more detail here, other than to say that development plans for the remnant parcel, which is shown as Part 3, have not been finalized at this time. And as has been mentioned, they will be considered by council at a later date, and it's not up to the committee this evening to render a decision on those. What hasn't been mentioned yet is that an application for a minor variance has been submitted for each of the severed lots. The minor variances are requested for the proposed lot geometry, as is shown here. In particular, a minor variance is requested to permit 15.2 meters of frontage, whereas the current zoning requires 19. And for the proposed lot area of 533 square meters, whereas 700 square meters is required. The applications for minor variance also seek relief from the zoning regulations as they will apply to future dwellings. In particular, a minimum front yard setback of 6 meters is requested, whereas 7.7 is required by zoning. And a minor variance for interior side yard setback of 1.5 meters is requested, whereas 1.8 meters is required. And a maximum lot coverage of 55% is requested, whereas 30% is permitted. All of the requested variances will bring the zoning of the property in line with typical modern zoning requirements and will permit the construction of single detached dwellings on the lots in a fashion that is typical for new construction. The Planning Act is very specific on the consideration for approval of land division applications, including severances. This slide shows the list of considerations that should be had. In this instance, the planning report prepared by staff in support of the application has done a very good job at analyzing the proposal's conformity with the Planning Act, so I won't go into too much detail and repeat them other than to say a few summarizing things. In my view, the proposed severances will enable the efficient development of urban service land in a fashion that is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. There are no impediments to development on the lands, and the proposed severances will not frustrate the development of the larger remnant parcel. The severances are consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform to the regional and local town official plans. Similar to consent applications, the Planning Act is very specific about considerations for approval of minor variance applications. In particular, the Planning Act stipulates the following 4 tests. Does the variance meet the general intent and purpose of the official plan? Does the variance meet the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Is the variance desirable and appropriate development for use of the land, building, or structure? And is the variance minor in nature? The following few slides will provide some detail on how, in my view, the requested variances meet these tests. 1150 Line Avenue is designated urban living area built boundary in the town's official plan. The proposed infill lots for single detached dwellings are permitted and in fact encouraged by the official plan. The proposed density is approximately 18 units per hectare, which is well under the permissible 25 units per hectare. The proposed intensification of under 1% is far less than the official plan permits. And since the proposed lots are similar and will effectively integrate to the neighborhood without negative impacts on it, the proposal conforms to the official plan criteria for infill development and intensification. For these reasons, it's my opinion that the requested variances are consistent with the general intent of the official plan. The proposed variance related to lot frontage and area are consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaw, since the lots will be adequately sized for their intended single detached residential dwelling use, and they will effectively integrate within the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed variance for side yard setback is consistent with the general intent of the zoning bylaw, since the 1.5 meter industry standard setback provides adequate space for drainage and maintenance purposes, and the reduction will not impact privacy. The proposed variance for lot coverage is considered consistent with the official plan, as no drainage impacts are anticipated, and the houses will be appropriately scaled to the lots upon which they'll be developed. Lastly, the proposed reduced front yard is consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaw, as a legal parking space will still fit between the dwelling and the property line, and the setback will contribute positively to the streetscape in this area. The proposed variances are desirable and appropriate, as they will facilitate the efficient development of underutilized urban service land in a fashion that will enable the future development of the remnant parcel. The creation of 2 infill lots with the proposed zoning regulations is desirable and appropriate, as it will enable compatible development that will not result in significant negative impacts to surrounding properties. The proposed variances are considered minor in nature for the following reasons. The proposed lot geometry is in keeping with the historical pattern in the neighborhood, and the lots are similar to others in the area, which will effectively integrate the development into the neighborhood. The proposed lot geometry with the variances is still capable of accommodating dwellings, amenity area, and parking. And the proposed setbacks will not negatively impact on surrounding properties and will permit the efficient use of each property. Adequate space is available within setbacks for parking in the front and maintenance and drainage on the sides. Lastly, though not prescribed by the Planning Act as a test, the establishment of need and hardship is often required as part of a minor variance process. And in fact, the town's official plan indicates that applicants may be required to demonstrate these things during the approval of a minor variance. In this instance, the proposed variances for lot frontage are required to provide for the efficient development of the property as a whole. The reduced frontages are required to divide up the land in an efficient way, which will still leave adequate space to permit access and servicing connections to the remnant parcel for its future development. Reduced lot areas are a function of the depth of the proposed lots. The proposed depths, and by extension the areas, are required to provide adequate area on the remnant lot for its efficient development. The reduced front and side yard setbacks are required in order to provide consistency between the proposed development pattern and the surrounding neighborhood, and to contribute to a positive streetscape. Lastly, the application of the as of right 30% lot coverage, which is currently a requirement, represents a hardship in this instance, since it would prevent the development of dwellings of similar form to those in the surrounding neighborhood on these properties, and it would not permit the construction of houses in accordance with the permitted setbacks. The requested 55% lot coverage is appropriate, since it will permit development in accordance with setbacks. In closing, before I turn it back to Mr. Maloney, I would just like to summarize my submissions. The proposed consents meet the applicable criteria outlined in the Planning Act for granting consents and conform to the requirements of the official plan for intensification and infill development. All requested variances meet the applicable 4 tests of the Planning Act, and the variances are needed to permit the orderly and appropriate development of the subject property to effectively integrate the development into the neighborhood. Lastly, as stated in the report from planning staff, the proposed severances and the associated minor variances are consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform to applicable provincial, regional, and town planning policies, and in my opinion, represent good land use planning. It's my professional opinion that the application should be supported by the committee, and on behalf of my client and Homes by Antonio, I respectfully request that the applications be approved as they were applied for. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just close our comments, I will focus these comments on the consent application, and then I will
I don't want anything more on the minor variance. Just stick with the
absolutely, yeah. So this committee has been giving a legislative function to make decisions based on good planning and the tests set out under the Planning Act, and being subsection 5124 of the Planning Act for consents. Your decision must also consider the provincial policy as well as the town's official plan. So with the report that you've received from the town's own planning staff in support of the two consent applications, as well as the objective evidence of Mr. Kernahan, the evidence, the expert evidence is that these consent applications should be supported. And that the committee, again, you will likely hear comments as it relates to the development of Part 3, and you've already heard how that really is not relevant. Now, the primary parties that are impacted by the consent proposal are those that live at 2 Steffler and 4 Steffler Street, because those addresses immediately abut Part 1 on the sketch. There are maybe others in the neighborhood that you hear tonight, or even have provided written submissions that abut Part 3. But really, I wanted to focus on the addresses at 2 and 4 Steffler, because they are the ones that are impacted by this development. And I wanted to refer to a number of conditions that have been required to be imposed or suggested to be imposed by planning staff that were intended to address any potential impact on those particular neighbors. We did discuss this at some lengths with the town planning staff because we recognize that there was this potential impact. So with respect to the consent applications, and more so as it relates to Part 1, there are a number of conditions that have been introduced that will address that, the potential impact. So the first thing is that there's an installation of a fence along that lot line as far as they can go pursuant to the town's bylaws that will provide that buffer. Now, I know the neighbors along 2 and 4 Steffler appreciate that the trees that are there. I know our client has had discussions with at least one of them. And so in the conditions, you'll see that there's a requirement for a tree savings plan for Part 1. So there's going to be a concerted effort as much as possible to try to preserve as many of the trees on that property as possible. But failing that, there is also a condition that requires the planting of 3 larger trees along the boulevard to replace some of the trees. I appreciate that that may not impact the 2 and 4 Steffler, but that's the likely the best that can be done. There's a replanting of some way. The other condition that is on the consent is that the driveway will be at the north end of Part 1, and that's done on purpose because that reduces the amount of living area on that side abutting 2 and 4 Steffler. There'll be a garage there where there's no living area. There is a condition attached to the minor variance, which I'll address perhaps in the comments as to the application, that further adds or further addresses that potential impact on those properties. So I will reserve my comments for that. We ask that the committee approve the applications for consent based on the applicable tests and the opinions that have been given to you from the town's own planning staff, as well as the consultant planner, Mr. Kernahan. And I'd ask that you approve the application subject to the conditions suggested by town planning staff. Subject to any further questions, Mr. Chair or members of the committee, those are our submissions as it relates to the consent application.
Okay. I'm sure all 3 of us have some questions. And I think one of the things that you admitted in your comments is that the people surrounding the area that have been given a package to comment on the 60 meter, I think they have to be heard. And if they have any good ideas, I think they have to be looked at and decide whether they should be incorporated or not. I think you should show a willingness to satisfy and listen to the people that are around the area.
Well, Mr. Chair, there's no unwillingness. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the comments as it relates to the development of Part 3 are not relevant to the decision you have to make. By all means, I'm the first one to say public participation is paramount.
I make the following. I visited the site net, and I see all these trees cut down and everything else. And I read that these people have flooding problems, a number of issues. And now we've changed the environment, made a number of changes. And we create 2 new parcels, but the third parcel causes problems for them. And more flooding, more problems. Have you at all thought about what you would do if all of a sudden we create 2 lots and all of a sudden, because of the third lot, the way it happened, all of a sudden people get flooded out on the south end, on the west end, and how this will be handled?
Well, Mr. Chair, one of the conditions that has been attached to the approval of the consent for these 2 lots is overall lot grading and drainage plan that will address the drainage of surface water from these 2 lots. So that will be reviewed by the town staff, including the engineering department, to make sure it's sufficient. So if anything, and then the development or future development of Part 3 will also have some sort of lot grading and drainage plan, obviously more sophisticated than what would be required for 2 individual lots, that would also address these situations. So at the end of the day, there will be an improvement of the drainage of surface water through the development of, again, I want to focus on Part 1 and Part 2 because that's what it's before this committee. But you even referenced Part 3, which is not before this committee, but that will be addressed as well through the future applications for development on that land. So if anything, development of this lot will improve that type of situation.
Well, having to make a decision, I don't want to be part of making a decision where we grant one thing and create a huge problem on the other hand. So to say that we can't look at parcel 3, fine, I'll go from a legalistic as to whether what is to be done with it. But I think we have to look at it from a engineering point of view, that if we grant these 2 and all of a sudden there is flooding in that, maybe there should be engineering and all the grading plan and figure out what you're going to do with the water before you get going, because I've read these and these people have some very serious concerns. I'm sure that when we open it up to the public, we're going to hear this loud and clear. And I want to know that you have some kind of a plan to satisfy these people. That's my major concern.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, that's why the condition is placed on the consent approval. So the consent cannot be realized until that drainage is addressed for Part 1 and Part 2, and everything will flow away from Part 3 because there's issues with pre-development flows and post-development flows that you would know that as an engineer. So that issue would be addressed, and actually, like I said, would improve the situation for the lots.
Then I'd like to make this comment, and I'm talking because I know that I have these people listening. I want them to know that what we're looking at is that when you do your engineering for the lot before you get your consents and everything finalized, that they do not have to fear that water will be coming onto their yards, that they're going to have flooding problems or anything like that, that the engineering principles will be dealt with so that we don't create a problem in the future for them. I just need them to have that, shall we say, that they feel good about the development, knowing that they're not going to have that kind of a problem because of it, if you understand what I'm saying.
That's fair.
Okay. I've set enough. Bernie, have you got any questions? Or Sandra, have you got any questions? I'll start with Sandra, go ahead. Yeah, okay.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions about the conditions that are suggested for Part 1. The first is the 6-foot tall fence that's going to be constructed along the north lot line. What is the timeline for that? Is that prior to construction or once construction is complete? And the second point of clarification is the planting of the 3 large trees. Are all the 3 trees on Part 1, or is it 1 tree on part 1, 1 on part 2, and 1 on part 3 somewhere.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to answer the committee member's question. So with respect to the fence, it's a condition of consent that we install that fence along the north side of the north side of the lot line. And that has to be to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. So that means that would have to be installed before we create the lot. So what that means, we only, from the date of decision, we have 1 year, or date of affirmation of the decision, you have 1 year in order to satisfy the conditions of consent. So, and it's a legislative 1 year, so you can't go any more than that. You can't get an extension. So that fence would have to be installed immediately. As it relates to the, if that answers your question, by all means, you can do a follow-up. With respect to the trees, they're supposed to be on the town's boulevard in front of parts 1 through 3. And I think there is some flexibility with the town as to where they would be planted, but it would be along the frontages of part 1 through 3. Mr. Kernahan did raise an issue that the frontage of part 3 is intended to be an entranceway to the future development. So it wouldn't make sense to park a tree or plant a tree right in front of that. So there may be some leniency on that regard. But no, as the condition reads, it's on the boulevards in front of part 1, 2, and 3 with some flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, Mr. Maloney, you raise a good point. I want the people to understand that no consent will be given until the conditions that have been read are met. I think that we should be clear that they understand this, and I appreciate that you've started to make this clear. So I need them to understand it. Okay, Mr. Law, you go ahead then.
Thank you, John. Through the chair, with respect to the 6-foot fence and the trees, from the aerial view pictures we see now, there's a lot of green trees planted on the north side of that property line. And it would appear to me that those trees will be cut down. 3 of those homes have pools in their backyards. You're going to have 1.6 meters from the property line of the building to the fence line, 1.6 meters. There will quite likely be a sidewalk going down along from the front of the yard to the rear of the yard, which doesn't leave any room to plant trees along the north side of those homes. So my question is, how will you replace those trees on the north side of that property line that will be on those homes that back on from Stefflar?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Bernie, are you talking the two the 2 lots where the trees are right now, Bernie?
Well, the first lot that's beside the homes coming off Stefflar, the first house. And in the pictures, there's lovely trees all along there. But all I can see is lots of green foliage when I drove over to view the property.
Can I ask the question a different way for you, Bernie?
Pardon?
Do those trees have to be removed to install the fence? And what is the quality of fence? Is it going to be a cedar fence or is it going to be a chain lock fence? I think we should also, the 2 owners of the property, I'm sure they don't want to see a chain link fence if it's going to be, and there should be some stipulation as to what kind of fence. And also, I'll ask again with the trees, how are these existing trees being handled?
Through Mr. Chair, to answer Mr. Law's question and yours as well. So with respect to the fence, the conditions read a woodboard fence, a solid woodboard fence along the property line. So no chain link fence or anything like that. A solid woodboard fence.
Well, is it going to be pressure treated wood, cedar wood? Is it going to conform to the neighbor's landscaping, or is it going to be a sore spot? I want that clarified too.
Yeah.
Or you talk to your neighbor and make sure that they're happy. Okay, I will
suppose
stop and I'll let you talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suppose the devil's in the details, but it would be consistent with the bylaw that the municipality has passed as well. There is a specific stipulation as to the type. I'm not sure you can get in much more detail than that. But to answer Mr. Law's question with respect to the trees, you'll see also that there is a condition that we submit a tree savings plan for part 1. I granted some of the trees, and our client did have some discussions, I know, with one of the owners, at least one of the owners, about how best to do this. But the tree savings plan would make an effort to preserve as many of the trees as possible. Obviously, as Mr. Law indicated, some of the trees immediately abutting the building will have to be removed, and there's no sense in trying to save a tree that will end up dying. But there is also a large area to the front where the trees will not be impacted by the building of the home, as well as in the rear. There is likely a large area of trees that can be preserved. And the point of what I'm saying is that there's a condition in this, again, approval that has to be satisfied within the 1 year, that there is a tree savings plan that would make a concerted effort to preserve as many trees as possible. And I can tell you from my client's perspective, that is his intention.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Bernie.
John, through the chair, I know we have a big issue with water in all of Font Hill from rain, storms. My concern is that there's not enough land left. Once you use 55% of the property mass to take into the building, there's not enough land left for the water coming down to be able to filter down through the soil. So the rainwater coming off of the roof, 55% of this building water is going to come down eavesdrops and is going to run on all 4 sides of this home. People going to the north, 3 houses have got swimming pools in their backyard. And this water is going to come down the roof. It's going to go on this 1.6 meters, which also is going to have a sidewalk. And the waters are going to go right straight over to the neighbors' yards. And I'm afraid that it's going to run into the pool. A wooden fence is not going to stop the water from running away from their new home over to the existing homes on Stefflar.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's similar to what I mentioned earlier. There's the lot grading and drainage plan, which is a requirement of that plan that none of the water can go onto the adjacent properties, at least nothing more than what was pre-development flows. So all that water will be directed towards the street, and assuming it's done correctly by an engineer and approved by the municipality, that all that water will flow away from those. There's the 2 properties, there's 2 pools that we don't really front on, or the part 1 doesn't really front on to 6 Stefflar. So I agree with your concern, but that's why there's a condition in here to have a lot grading and drainage plan to make sure to avoid that from happening.
Okay, Bernie, I'll add a little to that. If the engineers in their studies find that they have to dig a pond on part 3 to get rid of the water on parts 1 and 2, and to get rid of the problem of drainage, then that's what's going to have to be done. So there are options from an engineering point to make sure there's no flooding. It could even be, it could be far-fetched, but say they can't get rid of the water, so that they can't grant the consent after if we've given it or whatever, because they can't get the engineering to work to keep the from flooding, especially 100 or 500-year storm. So all I'm saying is, for Mr. Maloney, there is a protection for the owners on that, based the fact that an engineer has to design it, and we won't know what will happen until that's been seen. Mr. Maloney, if you want to care to comment, if you disagree or agree with that.
No, I think there's a condition in place that protects that from a negative impact on an adjacent property by through the requirement of a lot grading plan.
Okay, Bernie, go ahead.
Okay, through the chair, once again, we have issues here in Font Hill with water going down driveways onto the street. Some streets have storm sewers, which can take the water away. This street does not. With all this water coming off of these buildings onto Lyon Avenue without proper storm drainage sewers, we're going to have flooding on the streets. We have flooding on all kinds of our streets in Pelham right now. Station Street as an example, where we're spending millions to fix it, and all over our town. So I want to be concerned that the soil that we have on your lot can absorb a good portion of this water. By putting the building at 55% of the lot size, once again, 30% is what we qualify for. And I'm afraid that we don't have enough space in arable soil to absorb the water.
Well, Bernie, I think we've discussed this enough. We have Mr. Marr present, and
Okay.
Mr. Marr adds the dimension to the fact that he's the public works, and he can assure people that no problems will arise, because he, as a professional, he will be examining whatever design is made in consultation with whoever does the engineering. And you have to understand that he is quite competent and quite capable. And let me tell you, when he proves something, it's going to work. I think we can put this whole thing to bed now. Unless Mr. Marr wants to make an additional comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'll stand behind that comment. Engineering staff will be reviewing a lot grading drainage plan to make sure that the drainage from these parcels are not impacting neighboring properties. We have various types of drainage systems within the town of Pelham. Some streets have storm sewers. Some streets have roadside ditching. Some have a combination of both. So when we have the log drainage and grading plan submitted, engineering staff will review and make comments based on those plans and ensure that there's positive drainage towards the storm sewer system.
I thank you, Mr. Marr. Any other questions that we have? I have a question for Mr. Thompson. When is a property landlocked? The road that we're creating, or the entrance, I noticed from the drawings from the planner, isn't the 9.7 or 32 feet all the way. It narrows, and then it narrows in that. So it may be 32 feet coming in, but it's going to be less than that going in. And what size and does it have to be, or the width to be maintained so that the property in the back is not landlocked? Could you please answer that question for me?
Certainly, through the chair. I'm not sure what you mean by it getting narrower. The frontage is 9.7 meters on part 3, which is continuing, and then it's getting larger.
When Mr. Kernahan showed his drawing in the two parcels, and he showed the road, the property as exists is not a perfect rectangle. One side's longer than the other. So when you put the part 1 and 2 parallel to the north line, and the way it works, you have 32 feet frontage, but at the back of part 2, the road narrows. If his drawings if Mr. Kernan wants to show that slide, then we can look at it. I want to make sure that there's enough width for an entrance to be sure. We talked 32 at the front, but what is it between part 2 and the boundary line? If it's 25, if it's 25 feet, is that acceptable? That's how I want to make sure of that. You understand what I'm saying?
Through the chair, not entirely. I mean, okay, just to answer your original question, by definition, a parcel is landlocked when it does not have frontage onto a public street that's been improved. And by improved, that just means it's been paved as a road. So in this case, literally any amount of frontage on part 3 would constitute a parcel not being landlocked. And part 3, like we don't have a proposal, there is no proposal that's being contemplated for any private road development at this point in time. But generally speaking, private lane developments only require a frontage, like the laneway themselves are usually 6 meters wide. So typically a frontage like 7 meters or above or 8 meters or above is usually adequate. So there's a comfortable buffer here at 9.75 meters.
Okay,
it meets the definition of the zoning bylaw for not being landlocked.
So this access, there's no restriction as to the width of the access, correct? So we're not creating any problem that way then?
Through the chair, no.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Sandra, please.
Just to expand on that, I guess this question is also for Curtis. If the 2 consent applications are granted, are we not then creating part 3 where it will be a third parcel with deficient frontage? Is that not correct? Is there a reason why part 3 is not, because we're creating a parcel with deficient frontage, would that not be required to have a minor variance at this severance, if this severance is granted?
Through the chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, you would be conditionally approving 3 parcels. Well, you're conditionally approving part 3, which does have a deficient frontage. One of the conditions is that the frontage get rectified through a zoning application. The applicant could have done that today. They didn't have to. Similarly, part 1 and part 2 actually did not need to be contemplated today. If part 1 and 2, those 2 variance applications weren't in, you would have seen modified conditions for these 2 consent applications, which would have required the frontages and the lot areas to be sorted out. We still have those conditions worded. Should the variances not get approved today, they would have 1 year to sort that out, whether it be through an amended minor variance application or through a zoning bylaw amendment application. Either of those can address it for parts 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, thank you.
Curtis, just through you, we're not dealing with part 3 here today. I just, for the people, let them know that if they have any concerns for part 3, not only do we not address it today, but they can address it when the applicant applies for, if he applies for zoning or whatever, they can go to the town hall and talk to the politicians and make their voices known there. I just don't want it to be made today because we're not dealing with that. You understand? So could you just explain to them their rights based on if they go for a rezoning, so that we don't deal with it today?
Through the chair. Yeah, so basically what's up for debate today is the lot geometry and the size and the configuration of all of the parcels. In the event of a future development application, whenever that may be for part 3, for anything other than 1 single detached house, which is currently permitted, would warrant a zoning bylaw amendment application, which is a statutory public process under the Planning Act. So similarly, just forecasting here, we'd receive a zoning amendment application for part 3. They'd have to put the sign up on the property when we got to the point of a public meeting, and the neighbors within 120 meters, so it's a larger catchment area on the public notice, would be notified directly by mail. So yeah, and then there would be a similar process like we're having today, albeit with council instead. Okay.
Now the other thing, I noticed you addressed it, Curtis, in your minutes, that you need a subdivision plan if you create 3 lots. Now, we are creating 3 lots, or are we not? We're creating through severance 2 lots, or are we creating 3 lots? I'm anticipating this question. I just want to get this thing ironed out right now. Would you kindly explain the rationale of what you stated, why they don't need a subdivision plan.
Through the chair. So the official plan outlines, I'm just trying to find it here, but there's, I think there's 3 or 4 subsections in that policy, which outline generally when a subdivision shall be required. It's important to note that the language is prefaced with generally. That being said, the one that specifically cites about the number of lots as a trigger, it reads that when 3 or more new lots are being created, a subdivision plan shall generally be warranted. In this case, there is 1 lot. They're by definition only creating 2 lots. If there was a part 4 on here, then that would be 3 or more. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just want that to be clear, because when I first, I can understand that will be part, and I will just refer to your answer so that we don't get into a long discussion on it. Have you got any more questions from our members of the committee members? Sandra, Bernie?
No, I have none.
Okay, so Holly, I guess, do I ask whether we have any emails, or is that come a little later?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that comes after we have heard from all the pre-registered members of the public. And just bear with us, we will bring in the first pre-registered member of the public, and that would be Peter Scott. So we will just be bringing him in from the waiting room. So just give us one moment.
And Holly, I'm not disappearing. I'm just taking a quick break. I'll be right back.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have a quick 1-minute recess while we bring in Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, you should be receiving a notification from us asking you to unmute yourself. There should be a little microphone at the bottom of your screen. There you go. We can see you, Mr. Scott. I would just ask that you hold on to your comments until the chair does return.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you for your patience. We have Mr. Scott there?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chair, and we're ready whenever you are.
I'm ready. Okay, Mr. Scott, I gather you have a few questions. I read your comments and that, and
yeah, that's probably the understatement of the year. Okay.
Well, you've heard me get a number of questions answered. I tried to get the applicant, and you had our engineer, the town engineer. I think that there's certain things that we have explained quite satisfactory as far as I could. I don't want to dwell too much on this. I would suggest that you keep your scope of comments to anything new to add or anything that we've overlooked. So I let you proceed. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So first, I just want to thank everybody. I must thank the town of Pelham staff for the comprehensive and detailed package related to the development of 1150 Line Avenue. Obviously, a considerable amount of time and effort went in on our behalf, and the research necessary was comprehensive. specifically Curtis Thompson for his detailed responses and recommendations. I talked to him today and he was very helpful. I want to thank Nancy and Holly for keeping the channels of communication open. And I think everybody's been very understanding of the situation that we're in. I really felt that we were going to get railroaded into this development, but the questions that were asked by the committee were very helpful and very much appreciated. I also want to acknowledge that the neighbours, this development is probably going to impact our house more than anyone's in a neighbourhood because it's adjacent to our property. So I want to thank the neighbours. There was 14 neighbours, all 14 homes that surround this property, all signed a petition in opposition to the development being done. So I'd like to thank them for that support. I do have speaking notes on part 3, but I'll pass over those, and I'm sure the rest of the neighbours will probably want to talk about that. So what I'd like to do is just maybe talk a little bit about some of my objections. There was a lot more detail in the letter, but you've obviously read it, and hopefully you've got page 61 of the document where the 2 photographs are. Does everybody have that? Page 61, those 2 photographs. Okay, I'll assume that you can find them, so I'll just keep going. So I speak in opposition of the 4 applications before the Adjustment Committee because in my opinion, they're not minor, nor do they fit in with the characteristic of the neighbourhood, and they're incomplete. The word used in the presentation earlier was identical, existing homes. I know a few identical twins, and if one's 30% smaller, he or she is not identical. These lots are 30% smaller than ours. The applicant is requesting relief from the city approved zoning bylaws, which determines the lot size and the footprint of the houses to be constructed. The relief is being requested in not 1, but in 5 specific areas: minimum lot size, minimum lot frontage, maximum lot coverage, minimum front yard, and minimum interior side yard. It should be noted.
I'd like to just stick with the consent. I don't want to get involved into the minor variance right now. Let's just stick with the fact that the consent to severance. If you oppose that, let's explain reasons for that. Once we've got that ironed out and we work that out, then we can go to the next section.
Okay. Major in the application, it talks about privacy, and I believe it said will not affect privacy. That was in the presentation. So a major concern for us is the privacy. If the application is approved, it will result in the removal of a row of mature trees at least 30 feet tall, and a house will be constructed only 5 feet from our property line. Our backyard is currently very private. I try to illustrate the impact in our backyard on page 61 of the report. The first photograph is of the tree-lined lot, and the second photograph is just a Photoshop of a house in the backyard. And you can see the major difference to our property. My privacy concerns are, like I said, they're in you can see from the photograph. The report suggests the relief is being requested to accommodate the construction of a 1-story home, but this unfortunately is not a condition of the approval. After talking to Curtis Thompson, I understand that we can't make that a condition that it be a 1-story home, but I do know that in the application it said the applicant was requesting these changes so that he could build a 1-story home. So I'd really like to hear from the lawyer or from the consultant if that is the intention to build a 1-story home. It's not clear to me, and I'm concerned that the approval gets done and then a 2-story house goes up and it will become a problem for us.
Well, I'll ask Mr. Maloney. Let's ask that question now, Mr. Maloney. There was 2. There was also that I think Curtis was also talking with the windows or whatever, that you could have a blank wall facing his property or you know, some kind of glass. But what is the applicant's intent? Is he going to put single story? Has he thought about it, or or does he want to put a 2-story? What does he want to do? And quite frankly, I could go to Curtis, say, is there anything we can do about it, or to alleviate Mr. Scott's concern about privacy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, just a couple different questions. With respect to the side of the building, I did speak with our client. It is his intention to construct a bungalow. In fact, he has already constructed a bungalow such as the one he is proposing for this already. Sent me a picture of it. Very attractive building. I can say to